Good evening or good morning, depending on when you are accessing this content. My name is Andrea Castagna. I am a project manager at the Institute of Innovative Governance, where I focus mostly on projects with Europe and European Union. Welcome to today's lecture, where we will delve into the world of artificial intelligence and explore the challenges related to artificial intelligence that we face in Europe. As you probably know, because you are already familiar with AI, artificial intelligence is really changing the way our industries, our society, our human beings function. So it's crucial to understand the challenges that this new technology, this revolutionary technology is bringing to our society. But in this lecture, I will focus on certain challenges that are particularly present in Europe. I will start by providing you some definition of artificial intelligence, and then I will jump into the AI Act, that it's the first regulatory framework that the European Union has created to regulate this technology and everything connected with artificial intelligence. And we will try to see what's included in the so-called AI Act and to what extent it can mitigate risk, and to what extent it creates new challenges and, why not, new opportunities for European business, European society, and European policymakers. We will also explore a bit the challenges that policymakers encounter in navigating and exploring artificial intelligence, and we will try to see how the policymaker, particularly in Europe, try to balance innovation and the need to regulate and address specific issues, specific challenges that artificial intelligence brings to our society. Last but not least, we will try also to come up with some potential solutions to the challenges that we will highlight during this lecture. But having said that, I always like to start a content like this one by providing some definitions and reflect a bit on definition. I know that most of you have already some degree of familiarity with artificial intelligence, but I want to start with a very basic definition of artificial intelligence. So IBM, you probably know this company, has defined artificial intelligence as a technology that enables computers and machines to simulate intelligence and problem-solving capacities in a human way. And I want to stress this particular piece of definition, in a human way, because I think the first element of innovation when we talk about artificial intelligence is the fact that for the first time in the history of the human being, we have a technology that effectively simulate or replicate some skills, some capacity, some problem-solving capabilities that used to belong only to human beings. So I think that this is quite important, because if you think that the policy implications of such a definition, you immediately come up with the idea that policymakers, when they need now to deal with the AI, they need to deal with something completely new. Because in the past, when we were talking about laws, when we were talking about regulations, or some kind of regulatory frameworks, we were always talking about something that humans created. This time, in this particular time of history, we are facing something completely new, because we are trying to provide policy definitions that are beyond human. And this is the first and most important aspect to understand. So when we talk about policy regulatory framework, about artificial intelligence, The first element that we have to take into account is the fact that it's something unique. It's the first time in the history that we are facing beyond human capacity. But of course, when it comes to regulatory framework, such as the AI Act, we also encounter other definitions, because in every regulatory framework, and this is quite important as well to stress, in every regulatory framework addressing technologies, you have to define technologies as well. So on top of the definition of IBM as artificial intelligence in a way that replicate or simulate human intelligence and problem-solving capabilities, I would like to also stress the definition that the AI Act itself provided about AI system. And in the AI Act that was just approved a few weeks ago, but we will talk about that a bit later. So it's a very new definition because the AI Act has just been approved. So in the AI Act, the artificial intelligence is defined as a machine-based system designed to operate in autonomy and might exhibit adaptiveness after development, and because of that it can achieve specific objectives and interact with inputs that it receives. So you see that here we go a step further. So if in the IBM definition we do have a simple reference to human capabilities, in the AI definition we talk about machine-based systems that are designed to operate in autonomy. So the first element is autonomy. The second element is adaptiveness, meaning that AI can adapt to inputs that receive. And because of that, it generates outputs. So this is the other element that I would like to stress in this definition. So AI does not only receive inputs and adapt itself to those inputs, but also generate outputs. And this is quite interesting because in a way these two definitions complement each other, because one of the most fundamental characteristics of human intelligence is the fact that it doesn't only get inputs but generate outputs and reflect on the outputs as well. And in a way AI does the same thing. So when I think everyone was trying to play a bit with generative AI and systems like such as ChatGPT, and the output that you receive from ChatGPT are based on the input that you put in the machine, but then you can also use the outputs that you receive to regenerate new outputs and use the outputs as inputs. And this is something unique that it's very peculiar, because it's something that only or mostly human do. And that's something that I would like to stress, because this kind of circle, so output, input, and again output, it's something that makes regulatory framework in terms of policy making particularly hard when you talk about artificial intelligence. So to summarize, once again, I would say that when we talk about policy making, when we talk about regulatory framework, the definitions that we give, that we provide about certain technologies are quite important, because based on these definitions, we can come up with reflections, and the implications of this definition are huge. But when we talk about artificial intelligence, those definitions are even more interesting. First of all, because we're talking about a new technology, and second of all, because the definitions that we have nowadays about artificial intelligence are all based on the fact that AI can replicate human intelligence, so in terms of problem solvings, but other skill simulation, but also the fact that the outputs and inputs that are linked to AI are quite important because they go beyond mere definition of human intelligence, and because of that, they create quite a lot of challenges for policymakers. Having said that, I will try now to jump a bit into practicalities, because you might know that artificial intelligence is really changing the way we deal with our economy, our productions, our products. So it's really changing, you know, our economy as such. But when we look into the European context, and now I will talk about the European context, because this is the scope of this lecture. So when we look into the specific European context, we see that artificial intelligence is still not fully penetrated into the European economy. First of all, only 8% of European companies use AI. And this is a data that comes from Digital Europe. Digital Europe is the largest umbrella organization that includes digital businesses operating in Europe. And in this study, they stress that it's a very tiny percentage of European companies that currently use AI. And this is, you know, quite far from European Commission target that put as a goal for 2030 the target of 75% of European companies using AI. So you see, from 8% of now to 75% in 2030, I mean, it's quite huge. And, you know, the expected improvements are really need to reach this target. And of course, this has huge implications to European competitiveness, financial stability, and it essentially, you know, makes Europe, and particularly European digital companies, lacking a bit behind in comparison to their counterpart in the US, in China, in other parts of the world. This situation in which European companies do not engage in AI or haven't engaged yet into the artificial intelligence as expected in the goals of the European Commission, it's also reflected in the area of investments. We know, for instance, that when we look at the European investment landscape, well, the investments in technology research and development is only one-fifth of what we have in the US. And if you look at other countries like China, that's only one half. So when we look at the investment landscape in Europe, we see that this investment landscape is already smaller. And the investments in AI are even smaller than that, because the investment in the US into the AI are 50 times higher than in Europe. So there is a huge gap in the technological advancement between Europe and other parts of the world. In other words, Europe is really lacking behind when it comes to investments, but also use of artificial intelligence. Of course, you know, this is due partially to the fact that in Europe we have low availability of venture capital, and our stock market is not as big as, you know, the one we have in Wall Street or in other part of the world. When a company goes on the stock market, you know, like usually the capital raise is a bit or often very lower than the counterpart of the US. But, you know, it's also true that this is not a new tendency. So when we compare the period between 2012 to 2020, investments in venture capital in the US were 10 times those in the euro area. And because of that, so if you look at the investment in the general investment landscape, when you look at the total investment landscape, then you see that in Europe, the investments into the EI is already a tiny percentage. So, it's really, really a very small part of the investments that we make in Europe in terms of artificial intelligence. And that's why Europe lags a bit behind. But having said that, there is something in which Europe really is more advanced than US or China, and these are the area of regulations. Well, you very often heard about the fact that in the European Union and the European single market, policymakers are very good to regulate new things and create the regulatory frameworks that help companies to operate within, for instance, the single market or to access new markets. Well, that's certainly true to a certain extent, but Europe has also tried to have this approach on new technologies as well. So to create strong and fixed regulatory frameworks that allow tech giants, but also small companies to operate with clear rules. And the fact that, the European Union is basically a group of countries working together, this is certainly positive because allow an Irish company to operate in the Italian market or a French company to operate in Germany based on the same rules and regulations. And when I talk about the EI Act, that's the reason, the rationale behind this new regulatory framework. So the EI Act, and then I come back to something I was mentioning before. So the EI Act is the first regulatory framework on artificial intelligence that has been developed in the world. It has been developed since 2021, so it took almost 3 years to get finally approved because it has just been approved a couple of weeks ago. I'm recording this video in March 2024, and the EI Act has just been finalized by the European Parliament and the European Council. So now it will enter in force. There will be a period, a transitionary period between 2024 and 2025 when it will finally came into force effectively. So the EI Act was first proposed by the European Commission back in 2021. And it was created as a regulation. So why it's important to mention that it's a regulation? Because there are different regulatory frameworks in the European Union and the EU law, and regulations are legal acts that apply automatically and in the same way to all European Union countries. So as soon as they enter in force, they are valid in every single EU member states. And this is quite important because in comparison to other kind of regulatory frameworks, they don't need to be transposed into national legislation, regional legislation. There is nothing like that, very often we talk about directives, we talk about other kind of EU pieces of legislation. Well, the EI Act is a regulation, so it means that it has been valid since it was launched. But because of EI Act, as I say, it's a complex legislative framework, there is a transition period that is provided to member countries of the European Union, but also stakeholders to start understanding what it is the EI Act and to what extent it will impact on the legislation as well. So as I say before, EI Act is now into a transition period, and we're expecting to have to finish this transition period at the end of 2025. So what is the EI Act in practical terms? Because we talk about legislation, we talk about definition, but what is the EI Act? Well, the EI Act is essentially a set of rules for providers and users that put into place a system of risks posed by artificial intelligence, which means that the EI Act recognizes that there are certain risks associated by artificial intelligence, and according to the level of risk, there are certain actions that providers, users, systems need to put in place in order to mitigate the risk or to limit the risk, and to ensure two things: accountability and transparency. By accountability, I mean that there will be certain stakeholders or certain actors that need to do certain things related to the level of risk. And by transparency, I mean that there are some obligations that providers, services, users need to put in place when they use an artificial intelligence system is being used. And these two elements, accountability and transparency, are really the core of the EI Act. So, as I say, the level of risk has been developed according to 4 different categories. And I will now outline these categories. The first risk is the unacceptable risk. So all artificial intelligence systems that have an acceptable level of risk will be banned by the European Union and won't be able to be operated in the European single market. Those systems are usually a clear and evident threat to people's security and people's rights. And those systems really poses a risk that it's not considered acceptable by policymakers. Examples of these technologies are social scoring, for instance, by government or public authorities, or other systems such as voice assistance system that encourage dangerous behaviors for system. So these type of technologies will be prohibited by European legislation. So, and according to this risk, those technologies, even if produced by a third party outside the European Union, won't be allowed within the the European single market. The second level of risk is the high risk. So artificial intelligence system identified as high risk include technology used in key infrastructures. Think about transportation or telecommunication that can potentially endanger the lives and health of citizens, their professional trainings, or other factors that can be detrimental, for instance, to access education or choose a specific career path. Systems like this can, for instance, be a system created to give exam scores or specific credit scores. So all these systems will need to be subject to very strict obligations before they can be placed on the market. So those systems, those new technologies will need to undercome a risk assessment system, a mitigation system, and in some cases, the companies that operate such systems will need to keep a record of the activities in order to ensure, again, transparency and accountability of the results that were produced by the artificial intelligence. I can give you an example about that. All remote biometric identification systems are considered by the EI Act as high risk. And because of that, they will need to have strict requirements. For instance, they won't be able to, of course, disseminate this data, but they will need also to keep a track of the data. And the biometric identification will be very much restricted if it is used in together with an artificial intelligence. So again, after the unacceptable risk, the high risks are it is the category that poses the most restrictions for companies, users, and services. The third level of risk is the limited risk, which refers to AI system with significant lower risk for the users in comparison to the first two, but they need to provide transparency requirement. And again, why they're doing that? Because it's important to ensure transparency and accountability. An example of such system can be a chatbot. So users, they need to be informed and aware at every stage of their interaction with a chatbot that they are interacting with an artificial intelligence machine and not with a human. So if the two first categories of risks, unacceptable risk and high-level risk, poses very strict and very compulsory requirements in terms of critical use. For limited risk, there are only certain requirements related to the transparency and accountability. So again, the idea is that the risks associated to the AI must be fully understood by the people that interact with such technology. And last but not least, there is the minimal or no risk category. In this case, the technologies that will be created might not have any specific requirements, but it will be always important that those categories, the technologies falling into these categories are still categorized. Let me say that. So for example, anti-spam filters or AI video games features, they all need to be kind of it's in theory, like the users need to be informed that this system use artificial intelligence, but the requirements in terms of transparency are significantly lower in comparison to technologies such as high-level risk. What are the other important elements of the EI Act? Well, first of all, that there are certain exceptions for law enforcement agents that want to use EI. For instance, in principle, biometric identification systems, as we saw before, facial recognitions, other data, are very much regulated. But of course, law enforcement agencies they have a special permission to use them in exceptional circumstances, such as the identification of victims of crimes or other exceptional circumstances, such as kidnapping, trafficking, sexual exploitations. So essentially, the EA Act recognized that the law enforcement agencies have certain obligations in order to safeguard the fundamental rights of citizens, but at the same time, they can use certain technologies if these technologies can prevent some crimes or some potential danger for citizens. Another interesting feature of the AI Act is the so-called sandbox or real-world testing. So you know that it's particularly hard for small and medium enterprises, startups to adapt, to implement the measures that that AI Act has put in place. So there will be created certain control environments in which SMEs can try to see if the new technology works before launching the new technology into a market. So in this way, you know, it is given a possibility for startups or small companies to train and to test artificial intelligence before a market entry phase. So in other words, there will be a way also for companies to create a control environment for the development, testing, and validation of their system. And again, this is due in order to prevent that a small, medium company goes on the market with technology or with a service that falls under the unacceptable risk. So this sandbox is created in the way that can prevent a company to face big fines or get a technology ban because of the lack of testing. And why I was mentioning sanctions? Well, because the most significant part of the EA Act for a company is the fact that the sanctions are quite huge. When we talk about sanctions and enforcement of the regulatory framework included in the EA Act, well, the penalties, the fines are quite significant. They can range up to a maximum of 35 billion euros, or alternatively, the 7% of the global turnover of a company for the violation related to the prohibited AI applications, so for the highest risk categories. So this is something quite significant. Even companies like giant tech such as Apple or Meta can really be fined for a very for a huge amount of their turnover. At the same time, it's fair to say that there are more proportionate limits that will be imposed for smaller companies and startups, which means that if a company, small companies, is putting on the market a technology that hasn't been tested very well, or there are certain things that could have been done differently during the sandbox phase, well, the sanctions will be definitely more proportionate because of the size of the company or the startup. Well, having said that, we have to highlight two major things, and I will try to reconnect this with what I was saying at the beginning of this lecture. So you know that Europe is lacking a bit behind, and these kind of technologies can really create great opportunities for companies and potentially to attract new investment. The AI Act is created with that intentions, create a kind of artificial intelligence market framework that can help companies to operate in different European countries, but also protect citizens from the abuse of artificial intelligence features or risks associated with artificial intelligence. But if you think about what we were saying before, there are certain risks also in terms of innovation. So if you consider that only 8% of European companies use AI, well, I doubt that a huge regulatory framework such as the AI Act can facilitate more companies to use AI, because the the amount of integrations that they will need to do in order to catch up with this huge amount of rules, well, it will be quite huge, quite significant. And this can potentially have a negative influence with the fact that EU is trying to catch up with US and China when it comes to use, development, and investments of artificial intelligence. So we saw that the AI has risk categories. Well, the risk categories essentially are rules that a company, even a small startup or even a successful startup such as a unicorn, will need to put in place before launching a product. And of course, this might potentially limit the innovation. And the second point that I want to raise is that we saw before that Europe has limited availability of investments when it comes to venture capitals, when it comes to investing in new technology. And of course, within the European Union, there are certain instruments such as the Horizon to finance innovation. But it is also true that the level of investments is not comparable between the US, Europe, but also the Europe and China. So the AI Act, of course, creates the conditions for companies to have a clear set of rules to operate in European countries. But the tech giants, they need to create products that are global. They need to create artificial intelligence features that go beyond Europe. So the big question here when we talk about the AI Act is that are these set of rules enough to convince big companies, big investors to invest into the European market, into the European startups, into the European SMEs, considering that they are already small and they will need to catch up with these set of regulations that will definitely change the artificial intelligence landscape in Europe? Well, I don't have an answer to that, but it will be a challenge, and it will be a specific challenge that European Union SMEs, startups will need to face in order to boost their innovation, be attractive on the financial investment markets, and of course, it can potentially prevent them to expand and to create opportunities outside the boundaries of the European Union. Why I'm saying that? So you might think, okay, the AI Act is something new. It's something that we still don't know where it's going to lead, and it's a very ambitious thing that can prevent certain issues such as the risk categories that I was mentioning before, but also, ensure accountability and transparency. At the same time, the Act can prevent Europe to expand its startup AI ecosystem, or can prevent Europe to attract investments from other parts of the world because of a huge amount of regulations that the AI Act put in place. Well, what can you say now in terms of why this is important? Well, for two reasons. The first one is that, again, we are talking about policy making, and AI Act is a new technology. So at the moment, we need to experiment when we talk about policy making, when we talk about creating a legislative framework. So probably the AI Act is not perfect, but it's the first of its kind, and it's being the first of its kind in a technology, in a new thing that try to, and again, I'm mentioning here the definition, trying to stimulate human intelligence, problem-solving capabilities, and change the circle input-output that I was describing before. Well, you will see that the AI is something new and something to take into account when you or your policymakers will try to regulate artificial intelligence, because that's something that it's something unique and something that has arrived for the first time in the world of policymaking. But second, and most importantly, it's the fact that every policy making activity in the field of technologies, in the digital sphere, have always the problem to balance the idea of innovation, the idea of creating positive transformative changes within the digital sphere, with the idea of creating, and reducing the risk of associated to the use of new technologies. And the Act is exactly like that. In a way, it's trying to balance the idea of creating an investment and market regulated and competitiveness within Europe, with the idea that we need to reduce the risk for citizens. And that's probably something that it is yet to be done in the perfect way. But nevertheless, it's something that is challenging, and it's really the future of policymaking. The future of policymaking lies to the fact that we need to balance innovation with risks associated to new technology. I stop here, but please, if you have any comments or questions about what we say today, please visit the Institute of Innovative Governance website. You will find all the contacts, and I will be happy to answer any questions or comments or anything that you have in relation to what we say in today's lecture. Thank you so much, and have a good evening or a good morning, depending on what you're accessing this content. Thanks so much, and see you soon. Goodbye.